When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States.
Now, in our very first presidential election day since that assault nearly 4 years ago, the nation will bear witness to Kamala Harris's big tent coalition, one that is built up and bursting at the seams with allies old and new, traditional and rather unconventional, united by a single purpose: the preservation of our very democracy as we know it. Even at this late hour, new voices are flocking to that purpose and her campaign. They include Barbara Pierce Bush. She is the daughter of former President George W. Bush. She has endorsed Kamala Harris for president. Bush said she spent part of her weekend campaigning on behalf of the vice president. For now, though, there's no looking away from that bright national spotlight, once again trained on the ellipse in our nation's capital, on an assembled crowd, one that is not looking to disrupt democracy this time, but to save it. In just the last few moments, right before we came on the air, NBC News obtained our first excerpts of the vice president's speech. Here's some of what Kamala Harris is expected to say later this evening. Quote, Donald Trump has told us his priorities for a second term. He has an enemies list of people he intends to prosecute. He says one of his highest priorities is to set free the violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers on January 6th. Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. This is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power. Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That's who he is. But America, I'm here to say tonight, that is not who we are. That is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor is in Washington ahead of Vice President Harris's speech tonight. Also joining us, the former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Hafey, and former Capitol Police officer and author of Standing My Ground, Harry Dunn's here. And with me at the table for the whole hour, Harris campaign surrogate, the author of I Have Something to Tell You, our friend Chasten Buttigieg, backed by popular demand. He was in Battleground, Michigan late last night. He'll tell us what he's seeing and hearing. Yamiche, I start with you and your reporting on tonight's address.
Well, from what I can hear and from what I can tell, Vice President Harris is both trying to do two things. She's trying to really lay out her vision, which her campaign tells me is going to be optimistic. It's going to be upbeat. But she's also trying to underscore what she sees as the danger of a second Trump presidency. And that's where you see her, of course, using this location to make the symbolic point here that Donald Trump would put himself over the country because she will be standing at the ellipse, which is really the backyard of the White House. Where, of course, Donald Trump stood on January 6th, just a few moments before his supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol and broke in, which, of course, is the January 6th riot that has now become infamous in U.S. history. So she is really going to be talking about her to-do list, campaign officials tell me. That means talking about helping the economy, lowering costs for Americans. It's also going to mean talking about rolling back abortion bans and creating more housing for Americans. But she really wants to underscore the point that Donald Trump is a singularly dangerous figure and that if reelected, he would be more unhinged, more unchecked than the first time around, and that he could really undo the principles of America. And I think you just talked about those speech excerpts, but I think we have to underline some parts of it because she says at one part, and I think it really stood out to me, she said, Donald Trump has in mind more chaos, more division. She also talks about the fact that she believes Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. She also says he is not trying to make your life better. And then she goes on to say, I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to make your lives better. So she's really both trying to do these two things, because you could see why this would be a dark speech, but because she'd be talking about reliving January 6th. But her campaign really wants to underscore the part that she's also going to be talking about what she wants to do if she was elected as President Harris. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how she has those two things. We're expecting about 20,000, possibly more people here. The permit application has 40,000 people that they're expecting. And I should tell you, I've been standing out here all day. The line is just getting longer and longer. You can see just behind me, there are security barricades that went up with people getting ready for what is going to be this big event. Nicolle?
Harry Dunn, I want to know how you're feeling about where the speech is going to be delivered, and we'll get to the message next. I mean, it has to be both traumatic, right, that this is now a touchstone in American politics because it offers the sharpest contrast with her opponent. But it feels like maybe the only way beyond is through. What do you think?
I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing for her to use the symbolism of where Donald Trump last gave a presidential in quotes, address, and he sent a mob to attack men and women of law enforcement to overthrow the will of the American people. I do have to acknowledge, though, our friend Danny Hodges, who's still with the Metropolitan Police Department, will be working the event tonight, just like he was on January 6th. So my thoughts are out to the men and women of law enforcement who will be doing their job to keep the American people safe and keep all of us safe. So definitely think about that. But I do think the symbolism of the last time the former president spoke there with a message of division, us versus them, contrasted with the speech tonight that we expect to give Vice President Harris will be giving, a speech of unity. Donald Trump says it's us versus them, but Kamala Harris will be working to be a president for everybody, even if you don't agree with her.
Harry, Yamiche mentioned this part of the speech that the vice president has released ahead of time. It says Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. We know that is what made General John Kelly finally speak out against Donald Trump, someone who has a complete aversion to partisan politics. It was that proposal. What does it say to you that Donald Trump wants to use the United States military against American citizens who disagree with him, but he wasn't interested in using them to protect you?
Sure. And also, let's think about this real quick. He's going to be doing that, should he win, with the backing of the Supreme Court. Remember, they granted him immunity for what he considers presidential official acts. So, I mean, that's already just a scary thought right there. But yeah, it's a slap in the face to people, to law-abiding citizens, that he thinks that he is above the law. He is not. It's just a total. It's scary to think about it, Nicolle. I mean, it's totally scary when you think about it, that he can possibly win and get away with this. But that's why I think the enthusiasm is through the roof right now. The record number of turnouts, people early voting, people getting canvassing, knocking doors. Like when I've been all around the country, people are telling me I've never been involved in politics, but I have to do my part. I've said many times on this show that democracy is not a spectator sport. People are finding their ways to get involved, and they are standing up and saying, hey, we don't accept this. The institutions have failed to hold Donald Trump accountable, but there's the last fail-safe, and that is the people on November the 5th.
You know, Tim Hafey, a lot of focus, and again, I put myself in this category, has been on what Harry just mentioned, the inability of the institutions to hold Donald Trump to the same legal standard any of us would be held to, sort of the failure of the rule of law. And the men and women who administer it, to treat Donald Trump as if he were any American citizen. And there's so much coverage about how that animates his base, right? That he's a felon and he brags about it. There's zero analysis of how motivated the American people are to finally have our turn, to be the jurors of what's in black and white. Everything Donald Trump has been charged with is a public record. We all know that Jack Smith interviewed Mike Pence and has put all the breadcrumbs together. And I wonder how you think this speech tonight refocuses the public on all the existing evidence that your investigation produced and Jack Smith's as well.
Yeah, Nicolle, it seems like that's exactly the point of situating the speech at the scene of the crime, right? The speech that then President Trump gave at the Ellipse was the match that sort of lit the fuse that erupted in violence at the Capitol. His words there, repeating discredited allegations of election fraud, talking about you have to fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore, vowing to be with them. He actually promised them that he would join the throngs moving to the Capitol, directly led to the violence. I think in contrast tonight, you will hear a very, very different message from the vice president, one much more about a positive message, what we should be as a people. It won't be a litany of grievance. It will be rather a list of aspirations. And that's clearly intentional, Nicolle, because as you said, there's no more smoking gun or mystery about what happened on January 6th. Those facts have been developed from our committee, from journalists, probably even in increasing detail from Jack Smith. It's a question of focus. Is how much will those facts matter to people when they vote on November 5th?
Justin, I want to read more from, it's great to have you here. Thank you for being at the table. I want to read more from the Vice President's speech tonight. Again, these are released ahead of that address. Quote, I ask for your vote, and here is my pledge to you. I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to make your lives better. I'm not looking to score political points. I'm looking to make progress. I pledge to listen to experts, to those who will be impacted by the decisions I make, and to people who disagree with me. Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I will give them a seat at my table. When you go to the speech where he goes with this attack on his own vice president, forget about people who disagree with him. At that venue, he attacked Mike Pence, and she's going to say tonight, unlike Trump, I'm not going to put people who dissent in jail. I'm going to give them a seat at the table.
I think that's so important as a divided country as we are, that folks see that we have a leader in Kamala Harris who truly wants to bring people together. And part of bringing people together is to give them a seat at the table. When I'm having conversations on the ground in Wisconsin and Michigan, you have some folks who maybe have never come out to a canvas kickoff, or they've never knocked on doors before, or maybe they had never identified as a Democrat before, but they see something in Donald Trump that they do not recognize. This is not the Republican Party that maybe they considered themselves to be part of. And they're scared. They're scared for their communities. They're scared for either their union jobs, their kids, their daughters, their wives. And they, too, want a seat at the table. And that's part of building a big tent, the way Kamala Harris wants to do, is reaching out a hand and inviting people in. I was going to try to make it beyond 4:15 without dealing with this, Harry Dunn, but because you're here, I'm going to deal with it. People are scared. People who have LGBTQ+ kids, they're really scared. Yeah. People in homes with journalists are scared. Communities of immigrants are scared. Businesses that depend on workers from all over the country are scared. Kids who might not have anything to do with anything, but live in a town where Donald Trump says they're eating the labradoodles. They're scared. Everybody's scared. Talk about how you'd like to hear Vice President Harris deal with our collective fear.
You know, I try to pride myself, and you know, I've been around you and given you a big comforting hug at times before. I try to pride myself in being able to, you know, comfort people. Hey, it's going to be okay. I don't know if it's going to be